So, interesting read from Pete North's politics blog, and I have to say, I pretty much agree with everything he's got to say on this. And I'd love to actually speak to the guy if he does see this. I'd love to actually have a Skype conversation with you about Brexit, because you seem far more knowledgeable, certainly about it than me. So, you know, go read his blog. I'll leave a link to it down below. Pete, if you want to have a talk over Skype anytime, you know, that door's always open, because I think I've read a couple of your blogs, and yeah, I pretty much agree, but it would be interesting to talk to you a bit more and go into more detail about some of this stuff, because as you'll agree, Pete, a lot of this stuff just hasn't been discussed. So, the blog we're reading, I'll leave another link down to this one as well. Yeah, it's the same thing, so yeah. I'll leave a link to it down below. A Brexit failure now seems inevitable. So, Pete begins, I'm hesitant to make predictions. Whenever I do, I make judgments based on logic, and I often fail to take into account that the government, by its very nature, is an irrational thing. My own calculations prior to the referendum led me to believe that the UK would probably seek to stay in the single market once they came to terms with the size and scope of the task at hand. My working assumption was that our civil service would be sufficiently muddy the water and the Brexit zombies would be marginalised. That hasn't happened. As it turns out, the civil service doesn't have a handle on it. Either, and mid-ranking officials dare not speak out of fear of being replaced. And this is true. A lot of people that are currently sitting in the government, in the civil service, a lot of people who know the facts, know the figures, know what needs to be done, are being outright ignored, as are many of these experts as well. And a lot of them are quite scared, because if they speak out, they might get fired, because the last thing the government wants, or it thinks wants, is a political insider who might, you know, think they might muddy it up because they voted Remain. Now, I don't know what the civil service actually voted. It was actually very interesting to see how many people who actually work in the civil service voted what way. It would be actually quite an interesting thing to see, I think. Consequently, we have a government with a woefully simplistic view of Brexit, unable to grasp they have not the time nor the intellectual resource to achieve anything close to what they believe is possible. And I couldn't agree more. There is so much being said and what was promised, and it's not going to be delivered upon. There is being reports, again, from experts who are not being listened to, who have basically said, look, for Brexit to be a success, there's literally like this entire checklist of things to check off. And to actually do it and to actually succeed, pretty much everything on that checklist has to be ticked off, or else it's not going to work. And again, these guys aren't being listened to. So, you know, you can see the, you know, you're the passenger and the driver's sitting next to you, and you can see the oncoming cliff edge, but the driver keeps on driving even though you're warning him that the cliff edge is, you know, coming ever closer. I had half expected at some point for Parliament to assert itself. It was a reasonable bet, since Parliament has not, in the last 2 decades, ever shown any particular regard to public sentiment, which is true. With a Remain majority in the House, one might have expected Parliament to moderate the government. It failed. And hence why we got David Cameron's Brexit vote. All my working assumptions have actually been far too optimistic. You might say even naive. In that respect, I feel I've misled some of my readers. The notion that the government would eventually see sense could well have been wishful thinking. And as I've stated before, the government is in this bizarre state of it needs to start doing things, but it's not. It's still in this weird campaign mode, as if there's still this vote going to happen about Brexit. But we aren't. We've passed that stage, but the government doesn't seem to have acknowledged that fact. And that is in itself a dangerous position that the government has put itself in. It seems that only now we are a month away from pushing the button has the media woken up to the realities, and even then they do not have a comprehensive grasp on the issues. The media in many respects is a dog that didn't bark, or rather when it did for the pointlessness incessant barking so that the people just tuned it out. I agree with that as well. The media during the campaign was very, very really didn't get down to the nitty-gritty. There was no fact-checking seemed to be either on either side going on from the media. Consequently, it looks like we are now going over the cliff. There simply isn't time to negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement. And he's right, 2 years is not enough. There is barely enough time to even ratify one. The only way to avoid a crash is to agree a framework inside of Article 50 to maintain EU membership until a free trade agreement can come into force. As much as that notion will be intolerable to our own government, what is often overlooked is that the EU doesn't have much of a clue either. We are assuming way too much competence on their part. Only when we get the verdict of the Commission officials will we know what is possible, and I guarantee the government isn't going to like that. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but I agree. The EU is not going to give us everything that we want, because a lot of what we want is pretty much included in our EU membership. It's, as I've said right from the very beginning, this is when you join a gym, but then you leave and you stop paying membership, but you still want access to that gym. You still want to go inside and say, well, I want to access those classes, or I want to go and use your swimming pool. It's not. There will be a fee to charge to go back in and use the pool. It's the same with the EU. A transition will likely mean extensive membership with all the obligations that go with it. It won't be a matter of being a stick in the mud. It will be a matter of law and practicality. At this point, we need to watch out for May and her gang, who will likely treat this as like a dramatic showdown. And what I just said, the government is treating this as if it's some sort of campaign. And if this doesn't go well, if we don't get a good deal from the EU, what the government is going to do is, instead of place the blame on them and the people who were running the Leave campaign, it's going to be placed on the EU when it's not their fault. It's the government's fault, and it's the people who ran the the Leave campaign who went, oh yes, we can get all this, it'll be easy. Well, it turns out it's not easy, because again, that was a massive lie. We can expect theatricals for the folks back at home. She will make empty threats of walking away, only to be met with typical nonchalant French shrugs. As it happens, I don't have any insights as to whether May is serious about not paying a divorce settlement. We have some indication from Davis that we might, but this is really a matter of law and contract, whereby the EU will not be minded to haggle. May is pretty much offering up the same sentiment as Trump. We're going to build a wall, and they're going to pay for it. Again, you saw in a speech which got praised by all the right-wing papers of, this is the new Iron Lady, and likenesses to Thatcher. Well, here's the thing. Thatcher went to the EU when the UK was getting a bum deal, negotiated. We came out better from those negotiations. And as a result, from the negotiations we have done, the UK was one of the best member states to have the best deal from the EU. But, you know, it all really depends on how seriously the government is taking it. They've been told by their officials not to expect any serious interruption to trade should we walk away. There is a dangerous complacency at all levels of the government and industry. Meanwhile, city economists who know little of the system and the legal structures will flatulate about tariffs with absolutely no regard for the fact that the EU is a system of government and not just a trade bloc. One of my working assumptions here to now is that if reality doesn't bite before we push the button, then it will shortly after. And this is one of the things I've been laughing about constantly, and many of people who like me have been saying constantly, look, there's all these problems going to happen. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? No one's talking about them. There is as I've said, we are coming to a cliff, and we are trying to warn the driver what's happening, but they're not listening. They're just ploughing on ahead regardless. And if you voted for Brexit, you should be worried about this as well. Because if you did, then chances are you voted because you believed that the UK would be better outside the EU. When that is certainly not the case. And given what the experts are saying, we're in for pretty much a nightmare ride. I think possibly that it is another assumption that I will have to throw it in the bin. The whole process could very well be a pathetic political circus that never gets down to the serious details. There has been little in the way of scoping that we have not seen any proposition papers except for some vague aspirational stuff. There is no contingency plan either, which is another thing that I think we should be discussing. A Brexit contingency plan. It should seem that unless there is some kind of adult intervention where the clock is stopped, we may very well sleepwalk into a train wreck Brexit. It will simply happen and nobody will have the first idea why. The Remainers will bitterly complain and gloat, the Leavers will stamp their feet and blame the EU. Ultimately, though, the blame will lie squarely with this Tory government. Though a train wreck is something I have campaigned hard to avoid, I expect in the future I will realise that it was daft of me to expect that it wouldn't go any other way. In some ways, though, I am mischievously looking forward to it. As much as it will obliterate the Tories, it will be interesting to see the malfurious ways the system implodes and how we will cope with it. The whole thing turns on an elaborate web of rules and systems within systems. If we unplug it at the wall, then things will be very interesting very quickly. Whether it turns out to be, it certainly won't be boring. And this is the frightening thing. We don't know what's going to happen. However, we can make predictions. And the best people to go to that are the experts. And the experts being ignored. That's what's truly terrifying about this.